Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this house here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations.
Oath or affirmation announcements by the Deputy Speaker.
Honorable members, the Honorable Sherry-Ann Critchlow Coban, MP, Member for Lopino Bonnet, West, and Mr. Barindranath Tiwari, MP, Member for Caroni Central, has requested leave of absence from today's sitting of the House. And Dr. Tim Gopisinghe, MP, Member for Caroni East, Dr. Tim Gopisinghe, MP, Member for Caroni East, has requested leave of absence for today's sittings and on Friday, June 22nd, 2018. The leave which the members seek is granted.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers.
Minister of Finance.
Speaker. Only temporary. I have the honor to lay the following papers. Number 1 to 2, the report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Tobago Regional Health Authority for the years ended September 30th, 2011 and 2012. 3, the audited financial statements of Invest TT Limited for the year ended September 30th, 2017. 4, the audited financial statements of the Rural Development Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited for the financial year ended September 30th, 2017. 5, the audited financial statements of the Trinidad and Tobago Mortgage Finance Company Limited for the financial year ended December 31st, 2017. 6, the report on the operations of the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ended June 30th, 2017. 7, the report of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago with respect to the progress of the proposals to restructure CLICO, BAT, and CIB for the quarter ended March 31st, 2018. 8, the annual report of the First Citizens Asset Management Limited for the year ended September 30th, 2017. 9, the annual report of the First Citizens Bank Limited for the year ended September 30th, 2017. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that papers 1 to 2 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee and papers 3 to 6 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee.
Honorable members, the question is that papers 1 and 2 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee and papers 3 to 6 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprise Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Minister of Education.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have the honor to lay the administrative report of the MIC Institute of Technology Limited for the year ended September 30th, 2015.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have the honor to lay the following papers. Paper number 11, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries to the 16th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the audited financial statements of the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission for the financial years 2012 to 2015. Paper number 14, the response of the Auditor General's Department to the 12th report of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee on the examination of the audited accounts, balance sheet, and other financial statements of the National Training Agency for the financial years 2008 to 2011. Thank you very kindly, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have the honor to lay the annual report of the Strategic Services Agency, Ministry of National Security, for the year 2016.
Minister of State in the Prime Minister's office.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I have the honor to lay the annual report of the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago for the year 2017.
Reports from committees, Prime Minister's questions.
Member for Point of Pierre.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. To the Acting Prime Minister, would the Prime Minister please indicate what percentage of the shares in Trinidad Generation Unlimited, TGU, and the Government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago agreed to sell to Ferrostal GmbH?
Acting Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this question and the next two questions can only be properly described as political mischief. In the mid-year review, Mr. Deputy Speaker, which
One sec. Can you refrain from that statement, please? Retract it.
No, stand up and retract it.
Retracted.
Now listen, members, listen. It is very early in the sitting. It is 1:37. Right? I do not want to say that we have a long day ahead of us, but I'm not going to tolerate on both sides. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Sit, please. Member for Shogunas West. Would you like to tell me what I should do?
You're doing the right thing, Speaker.
Because keep in mind, I will respond based on how you all act. And I'm serious this afternoon. Early, I'm going to lay the cards on the table. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In my capacity as Minister of Finance, in the mid-year review presented in this House just about 2 months ago, I made it crystal clear that it was the government's intention to place a number of companies into the asset base of the National Investment Fund in order to offer shares, now bonds, to the general public. And one of the companies named by me in my capacity as Minister of Finance was Trinidad Generation Unlimited. It is therefore impossible, if the government is proceeding to use TGU as one of the assets to underpin the National Investment Fund, that the government would be selling any shares in TGU to Ferrostal. And this is why I say this question is political mischief. So the answer is 0.
Supplemental, Oropuchis.
To the substantive, to the Prime Minister. Could the Prime Minister indicate whether the decision taken by Cabinet on May 25, 2017, by Cabinet Minute 922, to sell 40% of TGU to Ferrostal GmbH, has that decision been rescinded?
Minister of Acting Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Obviously, if the Cabinet has endorsed the proposal for the National Investment Fund for the assets of TGU to be placed in the National Investment Fund company to underpin the National Investment Fund offering, obviously, this matter is no longer being pursued.
Supplemental, point of view.
To the Acting Prime Minister, could the Acting Prime Minister state when that asset National Investment Fund comes into being with the percentage of TGU in it, would Ferrostal be able to purchase part of that asset base?
Acting Prime Minister.
Obviously not. The National Investment Fund, as I indicated recently in the public domain, will have an asset base which will be used to offer asset-backed bonds to the general public. Clearly, if the assets of the National Investment Fund company are to be used to back those bonds and to generate income to repay the bonds, then clearly no one, including Ferrostal, can purchase shares in TGU as long as TGU remains in the asset base of the National Investment Fund. This is all very obvious and very clear. And to repeat, we are selling 0% of the shares to Ferrostal or anybody else. We are not selling any shares in TGU.
I recognize the member for Tabaki.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Acting Prime Minister, given that the Cabinet had taken a decision to sell shares to Ferrostal, and now you're claiming it's been rescinded, is there any liability on the part of the government to Ferrostal, or can Ferrostal lay claim to the government in any regard for rescinding of such a decision?
Acting Prime Minister.
Firstly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm not claiming anything. I'm stating a fact. We are not selling any shares to Ferrostal. And the answer to your question, there's no liability whatsoever. It was an offer which was dependent on an acceptance from the government and preconditions and conditions precedent, and that transaction was not completed. There is no liability whatsoever. And I want to say again, the government is not selling any shares in TGU to Ferrostal or anybody else for that matter. And it is impossible because TGU's assets are going to be placed to underpin the National Investment Fund, among others. TGU shares.
Question 2, member for Point of View, would you forego the, or you still want to entertain the question?
No, irrelevant.
Deputy Prime Minister, Becky Sita, I would withdraw question 2 and 3 based on the answer from the acting Prime Minister.
Question number 4, member for Couva South.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the acting Prime Minister, could the acting Prime Minister inform this House of the number of Venezuelan migrants who are employed in the Red House restoration project?
Honorable Prime Minister acting.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I am advised that the Urban Development Corporation of Trinidad and Tobago is currently conducting an investigation by making inquiries of all of the contractors and subcontractors employed on the Red House restoration project. Until that investigation is completed and the information is received, it is not possible to answer this question with respect to the number, whether there are any, or 1 or 2, as the case may be. However, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to make the point. Members opposite have to make up their minds. When 82 Venezuelans were repatriated recently, there was a hue and cry and a hullabaloo and a fuss coming from the other side about the actions of the government. And they demanded that we give Venezuelans refugee status. Members opposite have to make up their minds, because if you are going to give Venezuelan refugees refugee status, or Venezuelans refugee status, then you have to allow them to work as part of the refugee process. So make up your minds. It's either you want Venezuelans to get refugee status or you don't.
I recognize the member for St. Augustine.
Is the acting Prime Minister saying that you're now adopting a policy of allowing refugee status by the employment through indirect means? It's for the government to make up their mind.
Mr. Deputy Speaker,
Prime Minister, acting.
I didn't really, there was a lot of crosstalk down there. I would ask the honourable member to repeat the question, please.
Member for St. Augustine.
Thank you very much. Is the acting Prime Minister indicating a possible move to a policy of allowing Venezuelans here as refugees through indirectly employing them through the state?
Prime Minister.
I think there's a question later on that deals with that, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I think number 12 talks about the policy with respect to refugees. The point I'm making is that if a person is admitted as a refugee in Trinidad and Tobago, one of the conditions is that they must be allowed to work. So that if members opposite want this government to just accept Venezuelan nationals wholesale as refugees, then we must allow them to work. And this is why I'm asking them, make up your minds. What do you want? Do you want us to grant refugee status wholesale to Venezuelan nationals or not? Make up your mind. Because if we are to grant as a country, grant them refugee status, then we must allow them to work. That's part of the process. I'm sure the member for Naparima could educate all of you about refugee matters.
I recognize the member for Couva South.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I will ask the Acting Prime Minister to make up his mind in responding to the opposition this evening. You, hold on, Attorney General.
Members.
Is the Acting Prime Minister telling this House that refugees are currently employed in the Red House restoration project?
I will not entertain that question, member.
I answered that already.
Supplemental?
In relation to the investigation that the Acting Prime Minister alluded to, could the Acting Prime Minister also commit the government to investigating whether the labor laws of Trinidad and Tobago are being upheld in this Red House restoration project from the point of view of personal protective gear, overtime, and I could go on and on in terms of compensation and so on.
Prime Minister Acting.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm certain that UDCORT will cover all eventualities and all issues in the investigation. I'm sure they will make a comprehensive report on whether there are any Venezuelan migrants whatsoever working for any subcontractor on the Red House project and whether these persons are working there legally or not, as the case may be. But we have not yet received any report from UDCORT. There was only a newspaper article in a weekend newspaper. The investigation is ongoing, so the question cannot be answered at this time.
Member for Couva South, question number 5.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Again to the Acting Prime Minister. Could the Acting Prime Minister inform this House if the retrofitting works on the MV Galleons Passage in Santiago, Cuba, has been completed?
Prime Minister Acting.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the arrangement for the enhancement works on the MV Galleons Passage had two components. There were works to be done by the seller of the vessel, certain upgrade works, and there were also upgrade works to be done by the buyer of the vessel, which in this particular case was the National Infrastructure Development Company on behalf of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. So that the seller had work to do at his expense with his own arrangements on a contractual basis with the shipyard in Cuba, and NIDCO also had work to do on a contractual basis based on a separate transaction with the shipyard in Cuba. We have been informed recently that some of the materials and equipment that the seller requires in order to complete the enhancement works that were agreed to in the contract for sale of the vessel to NIDCO, some of these materials and equipment, the seller is having difficulty transporting them from Australia to Cuba because Cuba is still an embargo country for many countries. Cuba accepts shipments from some European countries and does not apparently make it very easy for shipments from countries such as Australia. The seller has reported that to us recently, that although fabrication of one of the canopies had begun, they were having difficulty in getting an airline or a shipping company to transport some of the remaining equipment and materials for the canopies into Cuba. So the government has taken a decision to bring the vessel to Trinidad immediately The work will be done in Trinidad, and the boat will be put into service very soon, and the enhancement work will be done on a phased basis while the boat is transporting passengers to and from Tobago.
I recognize the member for Couva South.
The Acting Prime Minister informed this House whether any retrofitting work was done in Santiago, Cuba.
Acting Prime Minister.
Based on the reports received from NIDCO, the answer is yes.
I recognize the member for Naparima.
Is the acting Prime Minister, was the government aware of the fact that there's an embargo in Cuba? And was that taken on board in making the decision to go there?
Members, Prime Minister, acting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The seller of the vessel, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm having a little trouble with all the noise over there. I would seek your protection, please.
Yes. Proceed, member. I will protect accordingly. Proceed.
Thank you very much. As part of the contract for purchase of the vessel, the seller of the vessel had agreed to do certain enhancement works at the Damen shipyard in Cuba. This was a contractual responsibility of the seller, not a contractual responsibility of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. The works that the seller is contracted to do have been affected by the seller's inability to get materials and equipment into Cuba, not the government's inability to get materials and equipment into Cuba.
Stop babbling now.
I recognize the member for Urupuchis.
Thank you so much. Mr. Acting Prime Minister, notwithstanding the embargo on Cuba, are you aware that in April this year, the United States Department of Homeland Security, under which the United States Coast Guard reports in specific matters, found that this vessel that you got from the seller that didn't know it had an embargo in Cuba
Question,
was
please.
found to be defective by the U.S. Coast Guard on inspection in Hawaii?
I would not entertain that question, member. I now recognize the member for Shogunas West.
Thank you. Mr. Deputy Speaker, could the Honourable Acting Prime Minister indicate whether or not these enhancements and these changes have been classified by the classification authority that is responsible for the safety of shipping? Ships of that nature.
Prime Minister acting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The vessel was classified by Lloyd's of London in its original condition as being suitable for coastal transport of passengers and cargo. So the vessel is already classified. The enhancement works to be done on the vessel are simply to make the vessel more comfortable for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But as we speak, the vessel is already in class and is already certified by Lloyd's of London to transport passengers and cargo in coastal areas.
Supplemental question 6 now. Couva South. Question 6.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could the Acting Prime Minister inform this House whether the Office of the Key has received the report of the three-member committee headed by Ms. Jackie Wilson to investigate the circumstances which led to the payment of $150,000 to a former employee of the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs?
Prime Minister acting.
Thank you very much. Yes, the report was received on the 4th of June, 2018.
Couva South, supplemental.
In the interest of transparency and good governance, to which the PNM subscribed to, are they willing to lay that report in this House?
Acting Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Unlike the life sport report, the PNM government, this PNM government, will follow due process. When there's a report that involves the conduct of someone, they have a right to be heard. and a right to answer any accusations made against them. So unlike the UNC, we are following due process and allowing natural justice to be developed.
Question number 7, member for Couva North.
Thank you. Could the acting Prime Minister say if Sandals International will be the recipient of a tax holiday as seen in other CARICOM countries, since the Prime Minister stated the hotel will be constructed and managed locally?
Prime Minister acting.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think this is an ideal opportunity to clarify and to deal with some of the mischief in the political domain. The model being used for the Sandals Hotel has been stated by the Honorable Prime Minister himself, by the Minister in the Ministry of the Office of the Prime Minister. The model being used is the Hyatt model, where the government will own the property and the brand, in this particular case Sandals, will manage and operate the hotel, and the government receives the profits from the operations of the hotel. The questions of tax concessions, these are standard in the industry, and they are still being negotiated and have not yet been finalized.
Supplemental Couva North.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, can the acting Prime Minister say if and when the Memorandum of Understanding between the Trinidad and Tobago government and Sandals International will be made public?
I would not entertain that question. Member for Naparima.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and we thank you for the enlightenment with respect to the model that is being used. But could you tell us, in the development of that model, what is the total equity input of the Trinidad and Tobago taxpayer, the return on investment on that money, and the break-even time frame, so that we could see value for money in Trinidad and Tobago?
Are you interested in value for money? Prime Minister acting.
Thank you very much. Mr. Deputy Speaker.
More than Mamu get?
Silence, please.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Hyatt model has been very, very successful. In fact, the Hyatt has almost paid for itself since its construction in 2008, 2009 for the Summit of the Americas. The government has received hundreds of millions of dollars from the Hyatt's operations since then. The precise details that the honorable member is asking for cannot be given at this point in time. But based on preliminary data, we expect the Sandals Resort International in Tobago to be as successful as the Hyatt, if not more successful in terms of return on equity, in terms of economic activity, in terms of the profitability, and in terms of the overall beneficial effect on Tobago economy and also the Trinidad economy.
Naparima.
Surely, thank you, Mr. Deputy. Surely, as Minister of Finance, you must have at your fingertips the profitability and return on investment on the Hyatt model. Please, could you tell this honourable House? What is the return on investment to date with the Hyatt, since this is the model used for Sandals, and the break-even time project?
Member, I would not entertain the question based on the answer that was just given. It will be provided accordingly. You had your hand up, Couva North again? Okay. Kumuto Manzelena.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Honorable Prime Minister, can you indicate there are two different models, the Hyatt model and the Sandals model. The Sandals model is representative. The Sandals is representative of an all-inclusive. And all-inclusive is very different to the Hyatt. And therefore, as such, in light of the information that has been going worldwide, that all-inclusives do not bring in direct investment to a country, how do you propose that we will get a return of our investment with a Sandals model compared to Hyatt?
Member, I would not entertain that question.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, what you are...
Members, question number 8, Couva North.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could the acting Prime Minister give an update on the land acquisition process for construction of the new Tobago Airport Terminal?
Prime Minister acting.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Public consultations have been held and are ongoing. The Section 3 and 4 notices have not yet been served, but will be served shortly.
Member for Naprima.
Prime Minister, tell us whether small hoteliers would be affected by the land acquisition, and therefore priority is being given to a Sandals model as opposed to a model that will involve small business development.
Member, which question you would like to pose?
Yes, I want to know if local
Based on
hoteliers,
the-
yes, if local hoteliers would be affected by the land acquisition process.
Right, thank you. Acting Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The terminal building at the Crown Point A&R Robinson International Airport in Tobago is many, many, many years old. As far as I can recall, it was done in the NER era. So that would make it at least 25 years old, if not older. And that small terminal building has long outgrown its usefulness. This project is a new terminal building, not necessarily a new airport, a new terminal building, which will be located at the other end of the runway, and the lands in that particular area are to be acquired for the construction of the terminal building. There are a number of parcels there. There are vacant lands, there are residences and other properties in the area. When the Section 3 and Section 4 notices are finalized and the acquisition is approved by Cabinet, the actual serving of the Section 3 and Section 4, then the details that the Honourable Member is requesting can be provided.
Next question.
Supplemental.
Chief Whip, guide me, please. Are you accepting it?
Yes.
Okay. Shogunas
Supplemental to
West.
the Acting Prime Minister. The acquisition of the lands for the Tobago terminal, new terminal, is by compulsory acquisition, Section 3 and Section 4. But the acquisition of the lands for the Curepe interchange is by private treaty. Why is there a distinction?
Would not entertain that question. Next question, number 9, Couva North. Couva
Thank you,
North.
Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could the Acting Prime Minister say if he will accede to the wishes of the Tobago people and consider full independence for them, as was expressed at a recent consultation on the Constitution Amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill 2018?
Acting Prime Minister.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I must have confessed I'm a bit taken aback by this question, since the Honourable Member for Couva North is a member of the Joint Select Committee, which is considering the proposals from the people of Tobago for more autonomy. It is my information that it is incorrect to state, and I think this again falls into the realm of political mischief, it is incorrect to state that the people of Tobago want full independence. My understanding that at this recent consultation, one person, one asked for full independence. It is my understanding, based on advice received from eminent Tobagonians, including the Honourable Prime Minister, the members of this House who represent Tobago East and West, and many other eminent Tobagonians who were part of the process to grant Tobago more autonomy, is that no one, apart from maybe this one person in Tobago, is demanding full independence for Tobago. So this is a mischievous question.
Question number 10, Couva
Thank
North.
you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could the Prime Minister say if he has received an audit report or has been updated on the investigation into the missing $10 million from the THA accounts meant for Virgin Atlantic Airways?
Acting Prime Minister.
An audit report has not been received. However, I am advised that the Central Audit Committee of the Ministry of Finance conducted an investigation some months ago and is currently in the process of finalizing its report into this matter. And I'm advised by the Tobago House of Assembly that the fraud squad is also investigating this matter, but no reports are available and no final conclusions are available at this time. But investigations have been conducted.
Member for Couva North, supplemental.
Just one. Mr. Acting Prime Minister, how soon before we get the report on the investigation? And why is there not an...
Member, one question, is the procedure. Acting Prime Minister.
With respect to the report from the Central Audit Committee, the information I received today from the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that the report is currently being finalized. It would be premature of me to give you an exact date as to the completion of that report.
Question number 11, Princess Tong.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the Honourable Prime Minister, could the Prime Minister indicate whether he has received a response from the United Nations regarding his complaint about their local representative commenting on the repatriation of over 82 Venezuelan nationals?
Acting Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm advised that the Prime Minister has not received a response from the United Nations regarding the complaint. However, I'm also advised that the person in question, the local representative, is leaving.
He's left. He left.
Member for Princess Tong.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could the Honourable Prime Minister say whether, in light of the comments made by the Honourable Prime Minister on this issue, where he indicated on April 27 that there are people who want us to join them in invading Venezuela, and we are not doing that, has been met by the U.S. government with concerns as expressed to the government? Could he confirm that? Could the Honourable Prime Minister confirm that the U.S. government has expressed concerns over these statements by the Trinidad and Tobago Prime Minister, that there are persons who are interested in having us join them to invade Venezuela? Those were the words of the Prime Minister.
Member, I would not entertain that question. Members, the time for Prime Minister's questions has now expired. Member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Members, again, there is a decorum in the House how we identify with members, and rest assured, even if it's being said at the lower end of the chamber, it reaches my ear. So please, members. And I was with member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the Minister of Health, in light of a recent incident involving a medical intern, could the Minister indicate what mechanisms are in place for the detection and management of stress in the workplace for doctors employed in the public health sector?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I sincerely thank my colleague from Faizabad for this very topical question. All ministries have an employee assistance program, as you know. So the Ministry of Health has an employee assistance program, and all RHAs have similar programs where employees can feel free to go and have their conditions assessed. For the management of the issues, that falls squarely within the employee assistance programs. For the detection, we go on performance management systems via quarterly assessments, annual assessments. However, for more daily assessments in real time, each intern, as you know, is assigned by the Chief Medical Officer to the Chief of Staff of the respective hospitals. They are then report to their head of department, and they are assigned a consultant. The consultant has the responsibility for the daily management of these interns to look out for behavior changes, changes in work performance, coming to work late, which are all signs of stress. However, in 2016, I approached the Medical Association, the Medical Council, the University of the West Indies, expressing my reservations about how we take people in to the Faculty of Medical Sciences based primarily on academic qualifications. It was my feeling we should have a more rounded student based on things like non-academic, sports, and so on. Another major concern is the length of internship in Trinidad and Tobago. It is currently 1 year. I have floated the idea to the powers that be that interns be put through a 2-year internship program. The last Minister of Health who floated this in the public domain, my colleague from Barataria San Juan, was massively murdered in the public domain when he said interns should go through a 2-year internship. I support that. I made that clear in 2016 to the Faculty of Medical Sciences and to the University of the West Indies that a medical intern should have a 2-year internship rather than a 1-year internship, so any issues like this have a chance to come to the fore. Currently, Mr. Deputy Speaker, an intern only has 4 rotations for 3 months each: pediatrics, surgery, general medicine, and obs and gynes. Wholly inadequate. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Faizabad.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for that answer. It would seem that the mechanisms are not sufficient in view of what happened. Can you, in that light, then indicate whether any consideration will be given to implementing periodic evaluations specifically geared to junior doctors' mental status, stress levels that can impact on their performance in the public sector?
Minister of Health.
I differ slightly when you said the mechanisms are inadequate. The mechanisms are, in my view, adequate. The thing is, are the persons charged with the responsibility, which are the consultants and the heads of staff, are they in fact conducting the assessments as they should? If we do it, then the systems are adequate. It is whether persons charged with the responsibility of the day-to-day management of the interns are actually doing the assessment. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, before I close, because I know we only have 2 minutes, we can do what we want with the intern. The solution is the quality of person we take in to do medicine. Because in this country, we give too much weighting to pure academics. Everybody has 4 A's now. When my daughter had to do medicine in England, you know what took her over this thing? Her involvement in PAN, her involvement in volleyball. That's what my daughter did in England, and she had to serve a 2-year internship. That system gives you a better product at the end of the day versus our system, which is heavily weighted on academics. Everybody gets 4 A's, and you don't consider extracurricular. You don't look at the rounded person
10 seconds, Mr.
so they
Minister.
can go into a hospital setting and cope with stress. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
No, it's 2. So, Shogunas, your colleague would like to, you'll give way to him? Okay. Member for Shogunas East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In light of the answer given by the Honorable Minister of Health, could the Minister indicate what is the weighting, the percentage weighting for acceptance to pursue a degree at the Faculty of Medical Sciences in terms of academics versus other factors?
Member, I'm hesitant to give clearance because you're on a different wavelength.
Can I clarify?
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the answer given by the Honourable Member, Minister of Health, indicating that too much emphasis was being placed on academia. I'm simply asking the question, could the Honourable Minister confirm whether it is only on the basis of academia or whether there are other factors taken into consideration for acceptance to pursue MBBS at the Faculty of Medical Sciences, University of the West Indies at Mount Hope?
Right. Minister of Health.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I never said they only consider academics. I said clearly that there was an over-reliance on academics. But my member now has raised another issue. What he should ask himself is why did the University of the West Indies, when they were in office, change the entry criteria to take biology out of the entry requirement to get into medicine and focus only on chemistry and physics? Why was biology taken out? And who was disadvantaged when they took out biology as a criterion to get into medicine? That is the question. That is the question my colleague should be asking. Why? Why was biology taken out? Why was biology taken out? And why did a compliant university accede to it?
Members, please. Right. Minister of Health, you have 10 more seconds. You care to avail yourself?
Yes.
10 seconds.
The question that needs to be, why was biology taken out and who was disadvantaged in taking out biology? Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Couva South, question number 2. Couva South.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. To the Minister of Education, could the Minister inform this House of the number of schools which will be repaired during the July-August vacation as a result of the 160 projects identified under the school's vacation repair program?
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The simple answer to this question is 160 schools will be repaired. Thank you.
Supplemental, Couva South.
Could the Minister of Education inform this House whether his ministry is in full tandem or operating in full tandem with the Ministry of Local Government as a result of a commitment given that the schools will be repaired by the respective regional corporations throughout Trinidad and Tobago?
Minister of Education.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, that is misinformation that is being presented by the member for Couva South. The issue was never in the public domain that the regional corporations will repair these schools. That was never in the public domain. What we said is that the regional corporations will assist, and we have been in consultation with the regional corporations on this issue. Thank you.
Couva South, supplemental.
So,
last one.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, is the Minister of Education telling this House that he was not aware that the commitment of the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Local Government effecting school repairs during the July-August vacation was not in the public domain?
Minister of Education.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it seems to me that the member for Couva South has a difficulty in understanding my answers. Usually. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I reiterate that we have stated publicly that we are enlisting the corporation and the support of the regional corporations in their assistance in terms of repairs to schools during the July-August vacation period. It is part of our policy of local government reform. Thank you.
We should define assistance. That's not understanding.
Yeah, one more. Okay, we have to go on to the next question. Question number 3, Oropuch West.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. On behalf of the member for Oropuch West, to the Honourable Minister of National Security, with regard to various posts on social media depicting a room filled with high-powered rifles potentially to be used in gang warfare in Trinidad, could the Minister state if any investigations have been launched to validate the authenticity of the post?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, an investigation has been launched by the Trinidad Tobago Police Service with respect to this post.
Question number 4, Oropuch West, again. Recognize Chief Whip.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. On behalf of the member for Oropuch West, to the Honourable Minister of Public Utilities, with regard to reports indicating that residents of Melaho, Vega de Oropuch have not had pipe-borne water supply for the past 6 months, can the ministers indicate when this situation will be rectified?
Minister of Public Utilities.
I have been advised that the communities of Malao, Vega, de Oropuch
is located off Lower Toko Road, Sandy Grande. Its sources of supply is the North Oropouche Water Treatment Plant together with the Sandy Grande wells number 1, 2, and 3. The area is at the northeast extreme of the North Oropouche distribution system. The area's water supply schedule is daily with high pressures at night where there is optimal operations production at the Oropouche Water Treatment Plant and the Sandy Grande wells. Over the past few months, the plants and wells have been experiencing disruptions that negatively impact on the maximum distribution. At this time, 4 out of the 5 water pumps are in operations at North Oropouche. The 5th unit is undergoing repairs at the Central Workshop Facility of Wassa. Resulting from these disruptions, the reduced plant well production has led to inadequate tank heights at Oropouche Water Treatment Plant to maintain the supply continuously. Low pressures in addition to the network therefore has affected the Malao residents at the endpoints, particularly members of road number 1 and members of road number 2. Members of road number 1 and road number 2 are elevated sites, roads of Vega de Oropouche Road. To improve the supply at the endpoints, additional valves were installed and localized operations in the areas have been done to increase pressure to reach these extremes. Checks conducted within the areas, including during the last week, revealed the following. Vega de Oropouche Road, supply number 63, end of the road during the evening and the night, with the person at the end, number Mrs. Passad, being checked. Members, road number 2, supply up to light post 3C3. The supply to these areas will continue to be closely monitored and adjustment made to reach these final endpoints expeditiously.
Member for Kumuto Manzelina.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Honorable Minister, can you advise what mechanisms were put in place to provide potable water for the residents, not only of Malao, but of also the other residents who have been experiencing lack of water supply?
Minister of Public Utilities.
I have been advised that additional pipe-borne, not truck-borne water supplies have been put in place to help the areas that have been affected. In addition to that, as I mentioned, in those particular areas, we have done some work to try to get water up to those extremities. And finally, right before me at this point, I have, based on the NP's representation, for water tank in my water tank assistance program, water tanks, a project that is being executed. And again, it's right before my ministry now, looking for approval.
Supplemental, Kumuto Manzelina.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Is it that the Minister is putting in place that persons can apply and receive water tanks, and how soon can these water tanks be made available?
Minister of Public Utilities.
As part of one of the social programs that we do have in our ministry is a water tank assistance program, and it is available for anyone to make the required applications. And as I said, this is before me now, and it is hoped to be done expeditiously.
Thank you, members.
Notice, questions for oral answer.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are 17 questions for oral answer. We will be answering 16. We're asking for a 2-week deferral of question 265. There are 2 questions for written answer. We will be answering both.
Question number 230. Member for Naparima.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question number 230 to the Minister of Works and Transport.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Vice. Deputy Speaker. So, Deputy Speaker, in relation to the Inter-Island Ferry, the Trinidad and Tobago Spirit, and the Express, I wish to convey the following information. TNT Spirit dry docking cost $10,199,000 US. TNT Express repairs and maintenance, $807,117 US. The total number of days the vessel, the TNT Spirit did not sail from 15th of May 2017 to the 16th of April 2018. The TNT Express was in operation from the 15th May 2017 to the 12th of March 2018. This is an equivalent of 301 days, of which 169 days were sailing days and 132 days were non-sailing days. The companies contracted for the repairs. Most of the vessel repairs was undertaken by original equipment manufacturers and industry specialists. And this is done to ensure the validity and warranty of parts, repair work on the vessel for insurance purposes. Thank you.
Question number 234, member for Naprima.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question number 234 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So, Deputy Speaker, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service utilizes machines that are known as automated fingerprint identification system and live scan machines to assist in criminal background tracing. AFIS machines comprise of software and hardware that are used by crime scene investigators, fingerprint experts, to scan 10 print cards and search the TTPS fingerprint database to determine whether or not there is a match. There are 10 fingerprints recorded on a fingerprint slip for the following instances: persons charged for criminal offenses, elimination for certificate of character, elimination from crime scenes, capturing information on deportees, firearm users license applicants, prints recorded from cadavers, and Interpol searches. Live scan machines offer the ability to quickly and easily collect multi-biometric and biographical data for offender booking, identity verification, and civil enrollment without the use of ink. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is in possession of 15 AFIS and 11 live scan machines. 12 AFIS and 3 live scan machines are currently functional. Maintenance schedules are in place for the software and database as well as the live scan machines. Maintenance and repairs to the AFIS system and live scan machines are undertaken by the supplier, Gomalto Biometric Systems. Additionally, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service Information Technology Department conducts routine preventative monthly maintenance on the live scan machines, which entails deleting unwanted files and making sure cabinets that contain equipment are in working order. The IT department also conducts daily health checks on the AFIS system, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Member for Oropouche West.
So, thank you, Deputy Speaker. On behalf of Member for Oropouche West, question number 245 to the Attorney General. No, it was Naprima before me. But
Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question 245 relates to the online court pay service system. Online court pay services and the court pay is the judiciary's software system which manages the information in relation to court-ordered maintenance payments made into the judiciary's custodial bank account using cash through a top-up card, links, credit card, as well as direct debit cards for payment, and out of the judiciary's custodial account into the recipient's bank account or to the recipient in cash, check, or via a prepaid payout card. The cost of setting up the court pay service, specifically in order to facilitate the design, supply, installation, and commissioning of the software solution, amounts to $75,000 TT dollars. The pay card to be used in connection with the use of the court pay service is at a unit cost of 20 TT dollars. As of June 17th, 89 persons were ordered to receive payments using this method. As such, $1,780 TT was expended in obtaining such cards. Further to this, as part of the rollout of a suite of services for the benefit, inclusive of maintenance payments, it is intended that service kiosks will be placed at all courts throughout Trinidad and Tobago. The kiosks will be purchased at a hardware cost of $189,000 TT dollars per unit. Number of persons who have accessed court pay services as at June 17, 2018, 172 users have registered for use of the court pay service, both payers and recipients, while 89 persons are duly registered to use PayCard. Since the launch of the court pay services on April 5th, 185 payment transactions have taken place, and among this group, 77 persons have utilized top-up payment method, 2 persons have utilized credit card, and 15 persons have utilized debit credit card standing order method. It is to be noted that payments made thus far utilizing court pay systems have been pursuant to orders issued by the family court. However, the court has received several inquiries from persons who have been making payments prior to launch for court pay services who are keenly interested in transitioning. I should add that, and without breaching the rules of anticipation in the Senate, we have specific legislation. In summary and in conclusion, therefore, this government has managed to launch, through its initiative and cooperation of the judiciary, the first time in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, electronic payments coming to life, because we refuse to accept the naysayers that say it is not possible. We have done so operationally by way of court order, and we're about to do that legislatively, as the Parliament record will demonstrate. Thank you.
Supplemental.
Supplemental.
Thank you. Deputy Speaker, the Attorney General, could the Attorney General provide, what is the name of the company that is providing this service on behalf of the government?
Attorney General.
Sure. There are several services that are being provided. I don't have the specific names, and I prefer to have them all correct. There would be a court pay solution, which is a PayPal representative, and then there would be some hardware aspects that are associated with that. I don't have the specifics of that, as they were not requested.
Member for Naprimo.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question number 235 to the Minister of Finance.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I would like to indicate that we are in the process of putting the final touches on the Small Business Incentive Program through the Ministry of Trade and Industry. There is in existence already through the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services a program, but this specific program that will be targeting the small businesses, there are certain specific incentives that will be done through the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and they are not yet finalized, but they will be quite shortly. Thank you very much.
Recognizing member for Princestown.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, is the Honourable Minister indicating to this House that almost 1 year since its announcement, this program has not materialized at all? Correct. This is an indictment and a failure on the government.
Am I answering?
Leader of the House.
Yes.
Member for Princestown.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, question number 241 to the Minister of Sport and Youth Affairs.
Minister of Sports and Youth Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, with regard to Part A of the question, the contract for the modified design... Mr. Speaker, I could barely hear myself. You help me, please.
Please, the question was posed, the minister needs to answer. I would also like to hear the minister's response. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, with regard to Part A of the question, the contract for the modified design build of the Diego Martin Sporting Complex was awarded to SRI Construction Limited. Mr. Deputy Speaker, with regard to Part B of the question, the procurement process to award the contract is as follows. The project was initially under the purview of the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago. Sport TT established a phased development plan for the Diego Martin Sporting Complex, and associated detailed designs were fully developed by the Interurban Design and Development Company Limited on its behalf. In 2007 for the intended Phase 1, and in 2009 for the intended Phase 2. The details on the procurement process to award the contract for the Diego Martin Sporting Complex are as follows. On April 20th, 2006, the Sport Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited sent a letter to Project and Construction Management Services Limited, informing them that they were successful in their bid to manage projects on behalf of Sport TT and that they were assigned 4 grounds, including the Northern Diego Martin, the NRRG, which is Northern Diego Martin. On June 6, 2006, Sport TT sent a letter to PCMS informing them that Associated Services Caribbean Limited, ASL, was appointed project manager for the works. In February of 2007, Sport TT initiated a selective tender for upgrade works at NRRG in Diego Martin. In the evaluation report prepared by ASL, it was recommended that the contract for the upgrade works at NRRG be awarded to the lowest bidder, SRI Construction Limited, at a cost of $5.5 million. On April 12, 2007, SRI was awarded the contract at $5.5 million. Estimated completion date of 25th September 2007. Mr. Deputy Speaker, subsequent to the above, a revised contract sum was awarded to SRI in the amount of $17 million with a revised completion date of 22nd of April 2008. SRI Construction Limited was engaged for the design build of phase 1 of the plan, which included a scope of works of a foundation for the 1,624-seater main pavilion and associated service infrastructure, internal site drainage, perimeter fence and main gate, field irrigation system, and field topsoil grassing and associated works. SRI completed all items of work with the exception of the last item, which was removed from their scope and issued to a specialist field contractor. However, during the course of execution of phase 1, the project was plagued by a number of variations, the main one being the change of the original field design based on stakeholders' demand. The change in the field design impacted the overall design elevations of the ground and thus resulted in major changes to the pavilion foundation, site box drains, and field drainage. These variations resulted in major project budget overruns and crippled the project, and SRI's contract was terminated in August of 2009. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in 2012, Sport TT engaged Exec-Tech Limited as project manager of the project, and in 2013, Exec-Tech prepared a report recommending that a request for proposal be issued to SRI for completion of works in alignment with the new mandate for a sub-regional recreational facility. By letter dated September 18 in the year 2013, thank you, Sport TT issued on a sole select basis a request for proposal to SRI for design build services for Diego Martin Sporting Complex. I have more, Mr. Deputy Speaker. SRI with a technical and cost proposal in the sum of $50,162,512.72 VAT exclusive. After negotiations between Sport TT and SRI.
Honorable Member, your time has expired. Supplemental? Okay, Princess Down.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the answer provided by the Honourable Minister, one thing stood out. I just wanted the Minister to confirm this, that the initial contract was a select contract. And in those circumstances, when it's a sole select contract, those sole select contracts are usually used in emergency cases or in cases of national security. Could the
Member,
Honourable Minister
15 seconds,
Could the
question.
Honourable Minister indicate in 2007 why that decision would have been taken and followed throughout?
Mr. Deputy Speaker,
Minister
I would
Schwartz.
repeat that. The information I provided in 2007, it was a selection process, whilst in 2013 and 2012, under their watch, that is when the sole selected was recommended.
Hold on.
No, it's you're not listening. 2012 and 13, that's when the sole select happened.
Member for Laventille West, please. Urupuch West. Members, please. Please. Urupuch West.
Yeah, thank you. Question number 254 to the Minister of Finance.
Minister of Finance, Leader of the House.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, this was the question that we deferred. I said 265, but it should have been 254. I apologize for that.
Okay, so for the records, 254 deferred.
Yes.
And not
265
265.
is being answered.
Okay.
That's
all right.
my mistake.
So Urupuch West, 255, right, for the records.
Deputy Speaker, question number 255 to the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for an excellent question. Upon immediate receipt of information, the Northwest Regional Health Authority launched an internal quality audit into the alleged mismatch of components for the period January 2017 to April 2018. Based on the preliminary internal quality audit report, the following measures were implemented. A comprehensive review and update of the procurement practices and processes for implants at the Port of Spain General Hospital was undertaken, and all relevant staff members are being sensitized and have been sensitized. To ensure effective compliance of this updated procurement process, posters are being strategically displayed and service coordinators in the theatre are monitoring the use of these components. And this is the crucial part where I think the member for St. Augustine will like. The authority has since issued a public expression of interest in EOI for orthopedic implants and consumables, and all interested parties are intended to provide the following, member for St. Augustine: a listing of the names of directors of their company and to disclose any conflict of interest. I may add, I already have in my possession the listing of directors of all these companies, and the names will scare you, but I will say no more on that. A list of surgical orthopedic items provided, place of manufacture, brand and supporting documentation that these items meet international certification and clinical quality standards, such as the Food and Drug Administration approval. Prior to the surgical procedure, the orthopedic implant devices are to be checked by the consultant surgeon, who should not have an interest in a company supplying the components. That is going to be strictly enforced. No consultant surgeon who has an interest in an orthopedic supply company will be allowed to do this. None. The nurse theatre manager or designate and the supplier representative to ensure compliance with the specifications outlined in the purchase order. B, the following measures were taken to ensure the components supplied from same manufacturer are in accordance with international best practice. During the first quarter of fiscal 2017-2018, a committee comprising orthopedic heads of department from the RHAs met with officials from the Ministry of Health to ensure that all medical devices procured from suppliers meet the international certification and clinical quality standards, such as the Food and Drug Administration. Upon immediate receipt of the alleged mismatch of components, the NWRHA reviewed its records to ensure that each supplier met the required international standards. Further, upon completion of the EOI process, the suppliers of orthopedic implants who meet international certification and clinical quality standards will only be utilized. I thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
West.
Honourable Minister, have there been any complaints from any patients thus far who said they have received mismatched components for the surgery?
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The answer is no. We have had no patient complaints. But what we are doing is strengthening the system. And the conflict of interest is going to stop. That is the genesis of the problem. That is the genesis of the problem.
Address the chair, please, Mr.
That
Minister.
is the genesis of the problem, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The inherent conflict of interest. When you have an orthopedic surgeon telling you that he will not use X joint unless it is bought from that company, and when you check the company, you are seeing who owns the company. Those days are going to be over and have been over. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Minister, you indicated that from the comments that you made in your contribution, that the names of the directors will scare us. Are you indicating to this House and to the national community that there's an orthopedic mafia out there?
There are names of directors on these companies, if you get it from the Register of Companies, who are the same surgeons who are operating on the patients, and they own the companies. And they will tell you which company to buy from. And then when you don't buy it from them, they will refuse to operate. But another doctor in another RHA has no problem using that same component from another company that the other surgeon refuses to use. It has to stop. It has nothing to do with wrong components. It has nothing to do with wrong components. It has to do with conflict of interest.
Member for Oropouche East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To the member for St. Joseph, member, assuming that all that you are saying is correct, is it not a fact that you can take action now or even before concerning matters of conflict of interest, improper conduct, and such wrongs if persons have been committing that for any period of time before today? You do not, I don't think, what help do you need that you could not have dealt with this matter before?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is quite amazing that our friends opposite knew of this, But you know what they did about it? Absolutely nothing.
Members.
When I became aware of this issue, when I spoke in my budget presentation last year, when I brought actual plates and showed you the prices being paid, I was the one who blew the whistle on this.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, 48-6, please stand in.
Since then.
Members.
Ask Maracarius.
Member, just rephrase the point where you talk about and they knew. You said with regards to they knowing about the matter.
It is my belief and my information that under the registrar of companies, which my colleague, you could have gone there, gotten the names as I did. It's an open thing. The minister, former Minister of Health, knew about it. He knew about it. Did nothing. I spoke about it in the budget debate about 1,000% markups. And we put measures in place to stop that so that the average citizen can have access to orthopedic surgeries on demand and not as a favor. Not as a favor. Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, everyone votes in the government for change, and everyone wants change. But when you try to change their particular thing. Change someone else, but leave me alone. Change everything else, but leave me alone. Don't touch me. But when a Minister of Health has to stand up on the public domain and take licks because somebody, Mr. Smith, can't get a knee replacement, that is the reason you can't get it. Because of the system that has been allowed over the years and over the decades to flourish in this country. And this administration and this Minister of Health is acting on behalf of those citizens who cannot go to the private sector. We are acting in the public's interest to get these operations done in the public sector. In the public sector. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Member for Bataria, San Supplemental.
Could you indicate to this Honourable House what year these procurement practices started? Was it 2007?
Minister of Health.
These procurement practices have been going on in Trinidad for decades. For decades. And nobody had the fortitude and the guts to step on toes. Everybody sidestepped the issue.
Silence.
And it was just allowed to flourish, and every year it just got worse and worse and worse. My mother in the 1950s had to pay $5 bed money to get a bed in Port of Spain General Hospital. My mother in the 1950s, before independence, had to pay a doctor $5 to get a bed in the Port of Spain. That is to tell you how long these things have been going on in this country. And no one has had the fortitude to do something. When my mother had to do that, and she tells you this over the years, $5 in the 1950s to get a bed in Port of Spain was big, big money. Was big, big money. Had to pay it to get a bed. We are bringing an end to all of these practices. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
That was the last supplemental on that question. Urupuch West.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, question number 256 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service has indicated that the counterterrorism unit has been established and operationalized as a subunit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service Special Branch since August 2015. In March 2016, the name of this unit was changed to the Terrorism Interdiction Unit, TIU, to ensure a clear distinction from the National Counter-Trafficking Unit, CTU, which has the same acronym. With respect to operations, the TIU works in an interagency configuration with specialist elements from the other units of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Member for Chaguanas East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question number 260 to the Minister of Trade and Industry.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Given the method of cost recognition, the percentage of profits for the local and foreign bookings are not available to the UDCOT.
Member for Chaguanas East. Supplemental.
Yeah, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is it possible for the Honourable Minister to provide as much details as possible in answer to questions A and B of 260 in writing, please?
Leader of the House.
Once we have the information, we will provide same.
Member for Urupuch East.
Very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question number 261 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Based on the information received from the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, the invitation to the Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister to visit Camp Komoto was issued by the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Member for Urupuch East.
Minister, indicate the purpose for that visit to which the invitation was extended.
Minister of National Security.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, that was not the original question. The question was asked with respect to the invitation, and as such, if the member wishes, he can pose that question separately.
Urupuch East, next question.
Question number 262 to the very distinguished Minister of Works and Transport.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the desilting work at the Bagmaya River upstream at Bagmania River, sorry about that, upstream of the La Fortune Plock Road to the Chester Street area, which is listed in Phase 1 of the drainage desilting of Watercross program, has commenced. Thank you.
Supplemental, Oropuchis.
Could the minister indicate when the drainage work will scheduled to be completed?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Cabinet had approved 298 projects under this drainage desilting program. 47 of these projects would have been in the southern district. As we speak, 20 of these, in the first phase, there were 32 projects. 20 have been completed, 12 ongoing, and in the phase 2, additional 15, which is expected to start next week. So I expect the phase 1 to be completed maybe by the end of next week.
Supplemental, Oropuchis.
Thank you very much. To the Honourable Minister, to follow up, bearing in mind one of the key reasons for flooding in the Debe area is the Kuchawan River in the Debe, in the vicinity of the market. Work had started before on clearing and paving that river. Could you indicate if any work will continue between the SS Erin Main Road and Gandhi Village, which requires clearing, paving, and walling to prevent flooding in that Debe area?
Member, just for clarity, those additional areas you identify, it's within that,
within the vicinity
that same,
of that,
okay.
yes, Chester.
Minister of Works and Transport.
So, Deputy Speaker, as I said, 47 projects would have been put forward by the head of the drainage department in the southern area. All 47 projects would have been approved by Cabinet and funding made available for the 47 projects. What the member is referring to is a different program under the drainage division, and that is not included in this 47 projects. Thank you.
Oropuch East.
Thank you. Question number 263 to the Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Minister of Housing and Urban Development. Leader of the House? Oh. Acting Prime Minister.
Acting Minister of Housing.
Isn't somebody supposed to answer the question? Are they supposed to stand up?
Question 263, Mr. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The construction of the Penal Fire Station is suspended due to termination of the contract in February 2018. This became necessary as the contractor went into receivership. The Urban Development Corporation of Trinidad and Tobago, which has the responsibility for the station's construction, has commenced the procurement of a new contractor to complete the project. UDCOT expects to receive proposals shortly.
Member for Couva South.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question 264 to the Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Social Development and Family Services, the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services has, over the last several years, employed persons on short-term contracts. These short-term contracts were primarily granted after long-term contracts ended to ensure continuity of operations where Cabinet approval had expired for programs and was being pursued for leave replacements. In 2016, it was decided that the situation had to be addressed when it was determined that numerous persons had been employed on a short-term basis for periods in excess of 4 years. This was contrary to the established guidelines for short-term employment in government ministries or departments, which provides for a period of employment of up to a maximum of 6 months. Affected staff, which included departmental unit heads, social workers, and field officers had become demotivated. Morale was low, complaints were numerous, and performance and service delivery were being negatively impacted. It was also recognized that the continued employment of staff for these extensive periods had the potential to create a great financial liability for the state. The Ministry of Social Development and Family Services therefore commenced the process of filling all contract positions on its staff establishment in 2016. A target of June 30th, 2018 was established for the filling of most contract positions. Accordingly, persons whose contracts were due to expire on June 30th, 2018 were issued letters related to the non-renewal of their short-term contract arrangements in anticipation that the relevant posts would be filled. A total of 109 short-term contract employees of the ministry were therefore issued letters related to the non-renewal of their short-term contracts. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Supplemental. Couver, South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I do not know if the Minister of Planning is in a position to advise this House in terms of how many persons have been employed at the said ministry in the permanent establishment based on what you have just advised the House in relation to filling of vacancies within the established organizational structure within the ministry.
Member, I would not entertain that question. It's a totally different streamline. Member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Question number 266 to the Minister of Education.
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in my response on April the 5th, 2018, to an earlier question by the member for Faizabad on the same subject, I stated that the Ministry of Education had sought clarification from Palo Seco Agricultural Enterprises Limited, PSAEL, on ownership of the property on which the old Hilo building, which is at the corner of Faizabad, Guapa Main Road, and the Petrotrin Road number 2. I can now report that in response to queries, the PSAEL has advised that the property was never released to the Ministry of Education. PSAEL has further advised that due to the close proximity of the site.
Is there a mobile device? Yeah, I'm getting a constant beep. Proceed. Please remember, keep your devices off or on silent. Proceed.
I can now report that in response to our queries, the PSAEL has advised that the property was never released to the Ministry of Education. PSAEL has further advised that due to the close proximity of this site to Petrotrin field equipment, it does not satisfy safety requirements for the operations of a public office. Therefore, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Ministry of Education will be unable to pursue any plans with regard to the utilization of the unfinished building located at the Hilo site in Apex, Faizabad. Thank you.
Member for Faizabad, next question.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question number 267 to the Minister of Public Administration.
Minister of Leader of the House.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is a question to the Minister of Communications, and it is answered as follows. The Trinidad and Tobago television channel will commence operations in August 2018. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Member for Naparima.
Deputy Speaker, could the member for Aruka Maloney tell us how many employees have been or are being terminated from the existing television station?
I would not entertain that question, Mr. Minister. Honourable Member. Member for Naprimo.
Well, then I'll change the question. Could you tell us how many will be employed in the proposed station?
Leader of the House.
I'm afraid I can't.
Naprimo.
Is the Minister aware of a business plan that will govern the operations and the projected return on investments for the new entity?
Leader of the House.
Yes, there is.
Member for Naprimo.
A business plan will talk about projected employment levels. Could you give us that, please?
Member, hold on 1 second. Could you make your question direct so that, proceed? That's the question you want to ask.
Could you put it in writing, please, the number of new employees?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, may I ask if it's new employees to be retained, or can I get exactly which question is being asked?
All of the above, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Okay, proceed.
New employees and employees to be retained.
Are you asking the question? You need to stand and ask the question.
Come on.
Members, no. Listen. Right? You are comfortable with the question posed and the answer received? Or do you want to clarify just for the records?
Minister, tell us, how many employees are being terminated from the existing organization, and how many employees are being retained in the new organization, and how many new employees are projected to be on the establishment?
Member for Leader of the House.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, there is no organization from which we are removing employees. We are starting a new organization called the Trinidad and Tobago Television.
Members, there are one more question to be answered. Though the time being expired, I would like to entertain the question. Member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Question number 268 to the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much again, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Only registered drugs are allowed to be utilized as stated under the Food and Drugs Act and Regulations, Chapter 30.01. Recently, several initiatives were implemented to improve the registration process and monitoring of drugs, including 1, the use of the online inspection system through TT BizLink and Asecuda, where there is a review, verification, and approval of importers' documentation through the Customs and Excise Division, including invoices, notice of approvals, consignee, and country of origin. 2, the reconstituted Drug Advisory Committee that conducts the review and assessment and grants approval for drug applications. To date, the backlog, which we inherited, has been significantly reduced from 629 to 258 items, and routine market surveillance at the pharmacies and drugs for the seizure and destruction of non-registered drugs. For the period 2015 to present, 809 boxes and 51 bottles of unregistered drugs across 26 pharmacies were seized by the Chemistry, Food and Drugs Division. I thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Request for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have been authorized by the Cabinet to make the following statement. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the Manifesto of the People's National Movement of 2015, which was adopted as government policy of the Government of Trinidad and Tobago, the PNM promised, and I quote, to implement the Draft Statistics Act and create an independent statistical institute with a board funded by the government. We made this promise fully cognizant of the tremendous importance of data-driven decision-making in both the private and public sectors. Today, I am happy to advise that a bill entitled An Act to Repeal and Replace the Statistics Act, Chapter 1902, and establish a National Statistical Institute of Trinidad and Tobago and other related matters, seeking to create the National Statistical Institute of Trinidad and Tobago, will be laid in this August House. Like other bills where we believe there's much value to be added from the input of all sections of society, we have also decided that this bill will be sent forward to a joint select committee for review and discussion. Mr. Deputy Speaker, national statistical offices are integral to strong national governance systems. The information they archive from censuses, surveys, and administrative sources form the National Statistical Repository of a country's national information architecture and support effective evidence-based policy development and decision-making. Further, these institutions are guided by international standards of data collection, analysis, and dissemination as articulated by institutions such as the United Nations Statistics Division, the International Monetary Fund, and the International Labour Organization. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is not unheard of for international rating agencies to downgrade countries because of the unreliability of data emanating from their national statistical offices. The soon-to-be-created National Statistical Institute will be a completely independent statistical organization responsible for the collection, compilation, and dissemination of timely, reliable, and relevant information critical to inform social, economic, and environmental policy. It will also allow for the expansion and application of this data-driven model throughout all facets of the country's governance. Whilst the Statistics Act, Chapter 1902, has worked reasonably well over the last 60 years since its conception, it has failed to allow the CSO to stay current with the tremendous developments that have occurred globally and maintain pace with the national and international demands required of national statistical offices. Whilst, despite this handicap, the CSO continues to improve and has published diverse official statistics on a more timely basis, it has, however, for almost 2 decades, been operating at less than optimal performance. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the journey which brings us to the laying of this bill today spans more than 10 years of consultancy and advice from a number of local, regional, and international agencies, including CARICOM, Statistics Sweden, and the IMF CARTAC. The ministry has also worked assiduously over a number of years and undertook several initiatives to bring us to the place where we are today. Mr. Deputy Speaker, permit me to chronicle these developments. 2006 to 2007, the Ministry of Planning and Development awarded a consultancy to Statistics Sweden International Consulting Office to identify an appropriate model for the restructuring of the CSO. The consultancy was also to deliver a comprehensive plan of action to transition from the present status to the model identified. 2008 to 2009, the CSO undertook an internal review of the reports of the consultancy, identifying gaps and additional works to be undertaken to give effect to the recommendations. This work resulted in the preparation of new terms of reference to address the gaps identified. However, from 2010 to 2012, nothing further was done. 2012, Statistics Sweden International Consulting Office was retained for a period of 13 months to deliver on 3 main tasks: defining of core products to be delivered through the CSO, designing of an organization, and creating an IT master plan. In September 2014, the Cabinet agreed to the appointment of a management transition team to develop and execute an implementation plan to transform the existing CSO into a new statistical agency classified at the highest level for statutory institutions. The management transition team articulated a vision for the CSO as a national statistical institute charged with the responsibility for the production, development, management, and coordination of official statistics guided by the UN fundamentals, principles of official statistics, and relevant codes of good statistical practice. In 2015, Cabinet approved the report of the management transition team. In 2016, the report and policy were submitted to Cabinet, and Cabinet noted the contents and developed a task force for the establishment of the National Statistical Institute. In July 2017, a task force was established under the chairmanship of Dr. John Prince for a period of 12 months to implement the recommendations of the task force. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the establishment of the independent National Statistical Institute will allow for the provision of timely, accurate, and relevant statistics consistent with international standards, which are cornerstones for the development of any country. A position of autonomy and independence is required for a statistical agency to enjoy credibility and fulfill its function in providing an unhindered flow of useful, reliable, high-quality information for both public and private policymakers. Mr. Deputy Speaker, not only have we completed the bill that will create this agency, but we have also very recently issued a tender inviting firms to design and implement a dynamic, modern ICT system to facilitate its continued growth. Mr. Deputy Speaker, a critical partner which has been integral to the transformation efforts has been the Public Services Association, which has faithfully furnished a member of the executive of the PSA to be on all of the ministry's committees. We are, of course, aware that an important consideration for the transition process is to ensure continuity of the CSO's work program during the transition, and we are aware that there must be no disruption of the work of the CSO. The efforts to enhance the national statistical capacity will find the ministry working not only with the current CSO staff, who are partners in moving the agency forward, but also with international and regional partners like the Caribbean Development Bank, the CARICOM Secretariat, the IDB, the IMF, and the Canadian government's project for the regional advancement of statistics in the Caribbean. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I wish to take this opportunity to formally thank the members of the National Statistical Institute of Trinidad and Tobago Task Force, who represented academia, labor, and the private sector. I wish to thank as well the National Statistical Institute of Trinidad and Tobago Implementation Steering Committee, with membership from ministries and state agencies, in particular the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Public Administration and Communication, through the PMCD, the Personnel Department, and the Public Services Association. In particular, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this team, which was led by Dr. Prince, we are, on this side, eternally indebted to him for the work that he did to ensure that we met this deadline. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we on this side look forward to the establishment of the Joint Select Committee and the robust discussions that will undoubtedly flow therefrom. We look forward also with even greater anticipation to the eventual passage of this bill, which, when laid, needs a special majority, and therefore we expect support from our colleagues opposite. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thank you.
Clerk.
Personal explanations. Introduction of bills. The Corporation Tax Amendment Bill 2018 in the name of the Minister of Finance. the National Statistical Institute of Trinidad and Tobago Bill 2018 in the name of the Minister of Planning and Development, motions relating to the business or sittings of the House and moved by a Minister, Public Business, Committee Business motions.
I recognize the member for San Fernando, Attorney General.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Be it resolved that this House adopt the report of the Joint Select Committee appointed to consider and report on the Anti-Terrorism Amendment Bill 2018. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the work before us today involves a considerable amount of effort, consideration, and occupies the attention not only of our good citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, who look to the state and its entities and mechanisms to provide safety for it, but also occupies the attention of a very large number of international entities and countries. The work before us today is the adoption of a report. And permit me to put on record what this report is about. The recommendation standing at page 12 of the report is germane to this motion, and I read it into the record at paragraphs 29 and 30. The recommendation of the committee is that Parliament agree with its proposals for amendment to the bill attached at Appendix 8 of the report. Your committee further recommends that the Parliament consider and adopt the Anti-Terrorism Amendment Bill 2018 as amended. Paragraph 30. For ease of reference, a consolidated version of the amended Anti-Terrorism Amendment Bill 2018 is attached at Appendix 9, and a consolidated version of the Anti-Terrorism Act, Chapter 1207, inclusive of consequential amendments, is attached at Appendix 10. What is being recommended, therefore, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that this House accept the work of the members that it appointed, together with those members appointed by the Senate, to consider the Anti-Terrorism Bill, the 2018 bill. For the record, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this particular bill was something which originated from another bill laid in 2017. In 2017, Bill number 9 of 2017 was laid on the 13th of February 2017 in the House of Representatives, stood on the order paper without debate until September 26, 2017, when the bill lapsed. That bill, number 9 of 2017, was referred to as the Anti-Terrorism Amendment Bill 2017, and that bill formed the structure of the bill which the Joint Select Committee, which has now reported, considered. That second bill is referred to as the Anti-Terrorism Amendment Bill 2018. The gap which occurred between 2017 and 2018, that more than 1 year gap, involved the Attorney General's office, the Office of the Prime Minister, and the Ministry of the National Security engaging in a great number of public consultations, in particular with a number of stakeholders, including the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago, the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, the Trinidad and Tobago Securities and Exchange Commission. It involved the Registrar of Companies, the Registrar of the Registrar General. It involved the Solicitor General's Department. It involved the law enforcement head standing in the person of the Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions. It involved stakeholders coming from the Muslim organizations in Trinidad and Tobago, in particular the Muslim Round Table. Several other individual entities which sit on other bases also were consulted. It involved consultation amongst the Orisha elders. It involved consultation amongst a wide section of persons. That 2017 bill was considered in need of certain amendment. In fact, the amendments made are reflected in the 2018 bill, which the Joint Select Committee considered, and that was to improve the mens rea around, or the mental intention around a number of the offenses, as well as to target and better manage the balancing act between the rights of citizens on the one hand and the rights of individuals on the other hand, a collective consideration versus an individual consideration. It was with that in mind that on Friday, January 26, 2018, I introduced on behalf of the government the 2018 Anti-Terrorism Amendment Bill, and on the 30th of January 2018, it was introduced into the Senate. Bearing in mind the need for public consultation, and bearing in mind that we took the precautionary step to add a 3/5 majority clause, even though there is advice to the contrary as to the need for a 3/5 majority clause, even though there was that advice, we took the caution on a 3/5 majority bill to refer the 2018 bill to a Joint Select Committee. And I'm very pleased to say that a Joint Select Committee was in fact established to consider the Anti-Terrorism Amendment Bill 2018 and to report on or before March 31st, 2018. The committee, which I wish to compliment in its entirety, all members participating, included your humble servant as chairman, Ms. Marlene MacDonald as a member, Mr. Fitzgerald Hines, MP as member, Mrs. Camille Robinson-Regis as member, Dr. Rudal Munilal, MP as member, Mr. Prakash Ramada, MP, Ms. Sophia Chote of Senior Counsel, Mr. Nigel De Freitas, Mr. Clarence Rambarat, Mr. Foster Cummings, Mr. Saddam Hussein, and Mr. Stephen Crease. These 12 persons comprised the Joint Select Committee, and I take this opportunity now, on my personal reflection and on behalf of the committee, to thank each and every one of the members, all opposition, independent, and government members, for the very fulsome engagement that occurred in the Joint Select Committee. I'm pleased to report that our Joint Select Committee met on 12 occasions, and we conducted on those 12 occasions also some very wide public consultation. We were very ably assisted by the expertise of Ms. Chantal Laroche, who served together with Ms. Simone Yallery, both legal officers at the Parliament, as the Secretariat to the Commission. Our committee met February 16th, 2018, March 9th, 2018, March 16th, 2018, March 29th, 2018, April 10th, 2018, April 18th, 2018, April 23rd, 2018, April 27th, 2018, May 16th, 2018, May 18th, 2018, May 22nd, 2018, June 1st, 2018. And across those 12 meetings, we were very pleased to receive, by way of requests for stakeholder contribution, written requests from the following, written answers to our requests for submissions from the following entities: the Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago, the Criminal Bar Association of Trinidad and Tobago, the University of the West Indies. We requested submissions from the Law Association, the Criminal Bar Association, the University of the West Indies Faculty of Law, the Interreligious Organization of Trinidad and Tobago, the FIU, the Muslim Roundtable, Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, Concerned Muslims of Trinidad and Tobago, Islamic Resources Society, ASJA, the National Council of Orisha Elders. We in fact received 7 sets of submissions from those persons identified. We did receive written submissions from the Law Association, the FIU, the Muslim Roundtable, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, Concerned Muslims of Trinidad and Tobago, ASJA, and the National Council of Orisha Elders. We also received submissions from Mrs. Joan Harrison and Mrs. Patrick Bino and Alex Bino, those 3 persons standing as members of the public who took up the public call for submissions. All of these submissions are annexed as Appendix 5 to this particular report. It was at our 7th and 8th meetings that we called for oral amplification to submissions received. And we were very pleased, and I wish to thank profusely, including members who are in witness today to today's proceedings. We did receive, and we heard on the 7th meeting on April 23rd from representatives of the Muslim Roundtable, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and the Concerned Muslims of Trinidad and Tobago. We also received personal oral amplification from the Financial Intelligence Unit at our 8th meeting on April 27, 2018. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the work of this committee was very deliberate. The committee considered the bill in a matrix form. We put the content of the bill as a marked up version to the Anti-Terrorism Act. We received all of the submissions and we considered every single submission made by members of the public. We also considered further submissions, both those made orally and those made in writing subsequent to interviews. We factored them again, and the committee sat and went through each of the submissions, clause by clause, in the 12 meetings that we had. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we were able to come back to the Parliament on April the 4th, seeking an extension of time because we could not meet the March 31st deadline. The committee requested an extension of deadline to June 29th. Fortunately, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we were able to report by way of a unanimous report of every single member of the committee the final report that now stands before us. And I'd like to say that this committee, in the spirit of getting the law right, did a very important thing. Mr. Deputy Speaker, whilst the committee had in fact finished the clause-by-clause analysis towards the end of May, in fact, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we were very pleased to receive a further submission coming from the members of the opposition. Under the hand of Senator Saddam Hussein, but adopted by all members of the opposition, we received a written submission coming from Senator Hussein, who himself was not able to attend the final sittings of the Joint Select Committee prior to his return to Trinidad because he was on training in the United States of America, funded by the United States government on counter-violence extremism. But Senator Hussein sent in, on behalf of all members of the opposition, a letter identifying certain provisions which we thought was necessary, even though the committee had completed its work and the final report was ready. We felt it necessary to reconvene the meeting, and we in fact met for another occasion where we were very pleased on May 28th, having received that letter, to actually meet on June 1st. And on June 1st, we traversed all of the issues raised by my learned colleagues opposite, the final issues raised, and in fact we agreed to some of the amendments, and we discussed some of the ramifications of the amendments that could potentially lead us in the wrong direction. And so your committee was able, with unanimity, to complete its work by June 1st. We, of course, laid the final report on June 5th. That is in the Senate. We laid it in the House on June 6th. But we very, very carefully ensured that the final report was laid, the marked up version of the bill was laid, the clean copy of amendments to the bill was laid, the act as it is proposed to be amended in final form was also set out in marked up version so that people could contemplate and reflect upon the amendments and proposed amendments in the context of the law which we were seeking to amend. So that now stands some 15 days away that we've actually had to consume this report. I can tell you that at the Attorney General's office, we were very careful to call around and remind people that the report was out and invite them to have reflections so that there would be ample enough time in the public space to consume this law. So let's get to the bill, let's get to the law, let's get to the business of the committee. Mr. Deputy Speaker, would you give me the precise time that I must end my contribution?
4:05.
Thank you, sir. You see, there's a lot to say and very little time to say it in, so permit me to try to do justice to this important piece of work. We have obligations to consider. We have our national obligations to our citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. We have the obligation to provide the right to life as an important entrenched right in Section 4 of our Constitution. We also have the right enshrined in various aspects of enshrined rights across Sections 4 and 5 of the Constitution to observe a democracy of the type that Trinidad and Tobago prides itself to be. Due process, proper consideration. But we don't sit in Trinidad and Tobago in isolation. We sit as part of a global network of entities that now manage how countries are to be considered in the global environment. All of our trade, all of our commerce, all of our livelihood is done on a global network, be it on the internet for research and education, be it by way of importation, be it by way of banking facilitation. Even local banking transactions sometimes find themselves passing through intermediary banks in the United States, in the United Kingdom, or elsewhere. Simple thing like swiping your card online to pay for a movie ticket in Trinidad and Tobago actually hits the United States banking system and then comes back to Trinidad and Tobago. So we are, yes, PayPal, etc. It's done by way of correspondent banking and other facilities. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's important to recognize that in this particular matrix of life, we find ourselves married to two very important organizations. The first organizational structure that we're married to is the United Nations, and in particular the Security Council resolutions. I'm finding it hard to find a person opposite paying attention. Please. Thank you. So, we first of all have the United Nations Security Council resolutions. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We also have another network of organizations which we're tied to, and that is the Financial Action Task Force, as it finds itself grounded in the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, that being a FATF-style regional body which comprises 25 members, and Trinidad and Tobago is one of them. So that's the United Nations, that's the Financial Action Task Force, and then there are mirror images of that across the Global Forum and in other aspects of bilateral treaty operationalization. These entities, these international organizations, ask the world to consider certain things as mandatorily in need of criminalization or management. And they are very specifically anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism. We are all familiar with the rights of child, with the Geneva Convention, with the Rome Convention, with the number of conventions that the United Nations has treated with. In fact, the parent act, the Anti-Terrorism Act, in treats with convention under Section 2 of the Act, specifically sets out in letters A through L a number of conventions starting in the year 1963 and moving straight through to 1999. Those are conventions. And through the listing of conventions, you see what occupied global attention. At first, it was acts on board an aircraft in 1963, unlawful seizure of aircraft. As we saw in the 1960s and 1970s, the big phenomenon was hijacking. We then went through chemical weapons. We then went through terrorism. And very importantly, there are a few United Nations resolutions that stand out. They are, the first one is United Nations Security Council Resolution 1267. That was on the 15th of October 1999. That happened in the events surrounding Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan, the target was Osama bin Laden, and the target was to treat with making sure Al-Qaeda, which existed in Afghanistan, was meant to be driven out of town. The Taliban simply too, the same thing. So that was in 1999. In the year 2001, on the 11th of September, we know there was the World Trade and the catastrophe in the United States of America. Just a couple days later, on the 28th of September 2001, in 5 minutes flat, between 9:55 p.m. and 10 p.m., the entire United Nations Security Council adopted United Nations Security Council Resolution 1373. And that was intended to put a mandatory provision that we criminalize terrorism and acts of terrorism in domestic laws. In 2011, we had UNSCR 1988, which split the UN 1267 list. It allowed us to focus now upon seizing and freezing of assets, to treat with the designation of individuals as terrorist entities at the United Nations. We treated with the phenomenon of foreign terrorist fighters in that 2011. We then come to UNSCR 2253, which was dealt with on the 17th of December 2015. And in that, the Al-Qaeda Daesh list was broadened to include the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant. That ISIL list became a creature of a US UNSCR resolution. And these names found themselves into terminology at the United Nations. And therefore, when the bill that came to us reflected upon the use of United Nations committee names, it was not intended to be anything other than utilizing the proper name. Now, I note, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that there has been submission in the public domain that the use of Arabic names somehow translates into targeting of Muslims. I don't personally accept that argument. I instead accept a different argument, but your committee decided out of an abundance of caution that we would avoid the use of Arabic names. Al-Qaeda, Daesh, ISIL. But I want to put it into common sense language. When you say the Nazi Party, we think of Hitler-Nazi, a German word. How can one possibly say the Nazi Party, which is the equivalent of Al-Qaeda, German phraseology, party name, Arabic name, Al-Qaeda in Arabic means the base, B-A-S-E, that's all it means. But it is known to be a terrorist organization. It's why I personally, having the heritage that I come from, having the line of history that I am born into, I don't accept that Arabic words are condemnatory of Muslims. This anti-terrorism bill, the Anti-Terrorism Act, is squarely against terrorists. And there's nobody in the world that can convince me that ISIL or Al-Qaeda or Boko Haram are meant to be anything other than terrorist organizations. Full stop. But that's my personal view. I don't draft laws, and this government does not draft laws for personal views. It is a collective view. I wanted to put that on the record because when we did some of our interviews, I had to ask a square question in the committee to the attorneys at law appearing for one of the stakeholders to ask whether ISIL or Al-Qaeda was ever going to be considered to be anything other than a terrorist organization. And the answer was yes, meaning we all agreed that these were terrorist entities. But why should international law affect us domestically? Just because the United Nations comes up with a Security Council resolution, why should Trinidad and Tobago comply with that? I'll explain why. Because the FATF, Financial Action Task Force, the Global Forum, the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, they have now brought the concept of having laws mandatorily considered into reality. And how have they done it? They have squeezed us into that position by international exposure to the risk of debanking, the de-risking, the loss of correspondent banking. They tell you, be as sovereign as you want, no problems. We're just not doing business with you. There will be sanctions against you. We will shut down your banking sector. You could be independent all you want. You could trade in cash. You could trade in gold. Nobody's going to accept it. You could trade in cards. You could trade in cryptocurrency. Nobody's going to bank with you. And therefore, the risk to Trinidad and Tobago as a part of a global network that I just described a little while ago becomes reality. Because that hits upon another argument that has come against the anti-terrorism laws. And that is this concept or argument that we are somehow trading sovereignty. Trinidad and Tobago is trading its sovereignty by agreeing to implement anti-terrorism laws. So let's take a step back from that. Do we as a people know, admit, say, volunteer that one terrorist amongst us is enough or too much? The answer is surely yes. But isn't it true that we have a named terrorist from Trinidad and Tobago? Forget the numbers. Who says it's 400? Who says it's 135? Let's start with one. Who on earth is Saad a Trinidadi, naming himself now, Shane Crawford. Shane Crawford, a Trinidad and Tobago citizen, found himself on Dabiq magazine on video, a national of this country promoting ISIS philosophy. And that one example is one too much. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let's put this into economic terms. We have an oil and gas sector. We live off of 45% of our contribution coming from international upstreamers. 45% of our GDP in terms of our contribution, to our revenue. 45% of our oil and gas money comes from the upstreamers, BP, Shell, etc. BP alone, on its offshore platforms, alone, 17% of its global revenue comes from Trinidad and Tobago. I don't know how many people know that. One oil company in one country, 17% of its global revenue comes from Trinidad and Tobago. Can we afford a terrorist attack in this country? Can the British financial system afford a shake-up with pension funds invested there? You see, there's a global interconnectivity. So even if you want to say, let's be sovereign and to not worry with the views of other people, we can't. Because the rest of this country still has to live. And we agree, one terrorist is one too many. So what does this bill say? The Financial Action Task Force, committed as we were to observing its process of review, came to Trinidad and Tobago and assessed us. First round mutual evaluation, second round mutual evaluation, third round mutual evaluation, fourth round mutual evaluation. In those mutual evaluation exercises, you go through a consideration of your technical compliance. Do I have the laws that prohibit certain things? Do you criminalize terrorism? Should you criminalize terrorism? Do you criminalize the financing of terrorism? Do you target the sanctions against terrorists? Do you make sure that you make life a living hell for anyone who would consider being involved in terrorism? And in 2005, in our second round mutual evaluation, the 2005 Anti-Terrorism Act became law in our country, and that has stood on the books of our country since then. Our laws were then amended in 2010, 2011, 2012, 2014. In 2010, in April, our laws were amended. Whilst we were going through the technical reviews, we saw some significant targeting and financial targeting and sanctions put into the anti-terrorism laws. Under the last government, 2011, 2012, 2014, we amended the anti-terrorism laws in very significant ways, with 3/5 majority support in some instances, and in some instances without 3/5 majority support. Did the then opposition, now government, make us squeak about it? No. We understood that Trinidad and Tobago was being rated by our international agencies, and we voted yes in both houses without a squeak, with full support lent to the government. And what happened next is this anti-terrorism amendment procedure which came about in our fourth round mutual evaluation. In our fourth round mutual evaluation, we were deemed to have significant deficiencies. In fact, 8 of them were pointed out. That on-site fourth round mutual evaluation happened in January 2015. Trinidad and Tobago was the first in the 25-country basin to go through the fourth round mutual evaluation, and we did not fare well. We went into enhanced follow-up. We went into the ICRG pool at FATF, that is the International Cooperation Review Group at the Financial Action Task Force. In other words, then, we were subjected to 2 forms of scrutiny. If you don't graduate out of these 2 pools, enhanced follow-up in CFATF and the ICRG process in the Financial Action Task Force, you get enhanced due diligence applied against your country. What does that mean? You get blacklisted, and people stop doing business with you. And you lose corresponding banking, and you're de-risked, and your banking sector shuts down. And in our fourth round mutual evaluation, number 1, they said in relation to our partial compliance that there was no specific provision for proposals for the UN Security Council 1267-1989 committee. Number 2, there were no mechanisms for identifying targets for designation as required by the UN Security Council resolutions. Number 3, there were no specific measures provided to facilitate the collection or solicitation of information to identify persons and entities who met criteria for designation pursuant to the UN SCRs. Number 4, no provision to facilitate UN SCR 1373 listings based on requests from other countries. Number 5, all the requirements and procedures for freezing of funds and assets were not covered in the legislation. Number 6, no provisions expressly prohibiting nationals, persons, or entities from TNT making funds, assets, financial services available for the benefit of designated persons. Number 7, we had not had and don't have enough rights for bona fide third parties not fully covered. Number 8, there are no measures for submitting delisting requests to the UN sanctions. Effectively, we had to comply with observed deficiencies with respect to Recommendation 5, Recommendation 6, the new Recommendation 5.2 bis, which was done just recently, a new added on because this thing revolves and turns all the time. We were also shortcomings observed in respect of the immediate outcomes 9 and immediate outcomes 10. Now, forgive me for being technical and just calling out a whole lot of letters. It's necessary for the record because when we are reviewed and rated, they go to our parliament to see whether we got it right. So there's a certain amount of technicality to this position which cannot be let alone or excused away without going into the details. This bill treats really with a few important things. And I'd like to say I genuinely believe that the bill has come a long way in the right direction. In summary, the bill proposes that we amend the Anti-Terrorism Act, firstly, to expand the definition of property of funds to include oil and other natural resources, and soft transactions, meaning credit cards, etc., paperless aspects. Secondly, to expand the definition of terrorist to include persons who contribute to the commission of terrorist acts or the financing of terrorism. Thirdly, to redefine the term terrorist act and create new offenses which were formerly only captured by definition section. Fourthly, to extend the scope of the act to cover offenses committed outside of Trinidad and Tobago. Fifthly, to extend specific offenses to specifically cover threats to commit offenses and taking preparatory steps. Next, we seek to expand the offenses of provision of services for the commission of terrorist acts, financing of terrorism, collection or provision of property to commit terrorist acts. Then we also criminalize joining a terrorist organization and attending and receiving training to commit a terrorist act, whether you do it in person or you do it electronically from right here in Trinidad and Tobago. We criminalize the attendance. We then seek to criminalize travel for the purpose of committing a terrorist act. And we deem such persons, for the first time in law, as foreign terrorist fighters. We also next provide for the Minister of National Security to designate a declared geographical area, not being a whole country, as an area to which travel must receive permission or there must be notice of travel. We then provide for a system of permits and exemptions for travel to those declared geographical areas. We revise the system for designating individuals and entities as terrorist entities and apply financial sanctions against them, including that at the request of other countries. We then provide a mechanism to propose names to the United Nations Security Council for listing of terrorist entities. We broaden the power of law enforcement agencies to gather information to cover documents, computers, and other electronic devices. We revise the provisions for the investigation of suspected terrorists. We revise the provisions relating to the gathering of information by the FIU. We revise the provisions for the seizure and forfeiture of terrorist property, and we allow it to be pooled and used for law enforcement. In the very short time, I'll pull out the headlights of concern and how the committee has addressed it. Number one, we propose that there be no reference to Arabic names. We instead refer to committees. Number two, we then propose that we treat with a broad definition of funds, property, what constitutes money, what doesn't, the tangible, the intangible. Number three, we recognize that we should never punish corporations where there may be persons who are directors or employees or officers who are on a frolic of their own and are not genuinely part of the corporation and who don't do it for the benefit of the corporation, we've cut that out and said we will only criminalize a corporation if the corporation knew what it was doing, the act was for the benefit of the corporation, the benefit was received. And so we've taken the caution to not go too broad. Even though the international forum is to go broad, we've said we don't run the risk here that way. And we did that very specifically because we want to provide a fighting chance for the first time in our country to people who are the victims of mischaracterization by foreign entities. Too many of our citizens are on no-fly lists or blackout lists because they happen to have an Arab name or a name similar to someone else. I've said it publicly that I've been subjected to secondary inspection on a number of occasions. They flag you, your parentage is Iraqi, you have an Arab name, you look a certain way. It happens. I can testify to that. But it's the first time that we have a regime where zakat, which is a pillar of Islam, one of the 5 pillars of Islam, can flow by way of notification, by way of understanding, by having a registry, as we regulate non-profit organizations very shortly, where we can stand up in defense of our citizens and tell a foreign entity, look, you got it wrong. Similarly, when we treat with Section 22, Clause 22 of the bill, and we're talking about the declared geographical zone, that caused a lot of concern. People said, look, you're going to interfere with my Umrah, you're going to interfere with my Hajj, Hajj being one of the pillars of Islam again, if you're lucky enough, inshallah, to do Hajj. But at the end of the day, the concern came there of mischaracterization. And what we have for the first time by the utilization of the modified Australian model is the Minister of National Security coming forward to say, we're going to declare a part of a country, but not the whole, as a declared geographical area. Before you declare the area, because this is an interest of national security, not for the government alone, but for a potential government in waiting, we say, let us tell the leader of the opposition, and I thank the honorable members of the opposition for bringing this under the cover of Senator Hussein's letter. We acknowledge that, we inform the leader of the opposition, we treat with the declared area, and then we tell our citizens by way of wide publication, listen, if you're there and you need to leave, be aware. If you did not know and you came back and you found out that you were there, whether by fact, whether by circumstance or mistake, you have an opportunity to tell law enforcement why you went. It has a huge caveat in it called lawful excuse, meaning if you just didn't know, if you had no way of knowing that you have that excuse, you are provided with the opportunity to give that information. If you intend to go, you have knowledge, you give notice of the fact that you're going. But we treat children very specially. Because is it not true, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that in this country we're aware of persons who have allegedly gone to join ISIS, took their wives and took their children. And therefore there's a positive obligation upon the state to ensure that children are not the victims of mad ideology by some parent who thinks otherwise than clearly. And that happens, that's humanity. So we allow for the first time the government of Trinidad and Tobago, by having a register, by having information, to tell a foreign entity you got it wrong. Particularly when there's the difficult situation of different countries treating one thing differently. The United Kingdom will have an entity which is supported by Prince Charles for purposes of charitable benefit. The United States may blacklist it, or Canada may blacklist it. And so we have our citizens giving zakat on the one hand, perfectly well, Prince Charles is doing it, and somebody else says, no, you're funding a terrorist organization. And for those reasons, we have now allowed by the system of organization relief for the first time for our citizens. What have we done further? In the bill, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are very importantly treating with how we manage designated entities. And let me explain what a designated entity is. A designated entity is an entity declared by the United Nations as a terrorist entity. We in Trinidad and Tobago, I as Attorney General, in coming into office in September 2015, had the pleasure of operationalizing the anti-terrorism laws for the first time ever. 10 years after its inception, the first action taken under the Anti-Terrorism Act was under this government. We listed terrorist organizations. We have done that now 356 times. We have used the 1267 route at the United Nations to list even our locals. Shane Crawford, we listed at the United Nations. We have now shared with our counterpart territories requests. And what we have done is to close a gap for the first time, because the Attorney General wears the hat and has worn the legislative hat since 2005. There is no interference by this Attorney General or an Attorney General, because all civil law is conducted by the Attorney General under the constitutional arrangements of our democracy. The criminal law we preserve separately by having the Commissioner of Police, and in particular under Section 45 of the Police Service Act, and under Section 123 and 123A of the Constitution, we have the Commissioner of Police having autonomy for his matters. We recognize in this bill that the DPP has a role to play, but that the DPP's function is again separate, again by Section 90 of the Constitution. So what we seek to do in this bill is to ensure that we keep the separation of powers where they are, but we encourage the fluidity of exchange of information, as we do, for instance, under the amendments to Section 22AA of the Parent Law, as we do in the amendments in Section 22B onward under the Part 3A of the Parent Act, which treats with the financing of terrorism. What we do is to ensure that we treat with these things carefully, because the civil arm of the state must know what it is relevant to be known, and the other arm of the state, which handles criminal prosecutions, keeps its own basket. We recognized, and we have inserted right throughout the bill under the offense categorizations, an improvement to the mental intention aspect. There is no strict liability offense under these amendments, none, because there may be a lawful excuse or an element of intentionality that must be proved. We have removed any reference to recklessness, because recklessness lent itself to abuse. But lawful excuse may exist. You may lawfully understand that you sent money by way of zakat to an entity which X country says is a terrorist entity, a listed entity, but Y country says no, and you lawfully believe that, look, Prince Charles is supporting that entity. You have a reason for what you did. And this bill brings to life these positions of protection in the animus, in the mental intention aspect of the crime. You must have the act and you must have the mental intention. Mr. Deputy Speaker, is it 404? 405. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there's no way that one can do justice to the depth of amendments here. The justice is to be done by way of reflection upon the full report. This full report was an exercise that was unanimous. It was an exercise that brought about significant improvements to the legislation. I want to say I don't often give my colleagues opposite a lot of credit on certain things, but I do say that there is credit well deserved to every member of the committee, all. And I include Oropuch East, specifically. And I say that because the member turned up at almost every meeting and contributed clearly. The member for St. Augustine, the Honorable Senator Saddam Hussein, Senator Crease, the senators on the PNM bench, and the members of the House. There really was a spirit of cooperation and facility to get this right. I can only pray, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we've done enough. I need to say that the deadline and the clock is now. We are obliged to have completed this month this work product. We've spent 2 years getting here. We've had a lot of consultation, wide stakeholder contribution, fulsome deliberations in the Joint Select Committee. I believe that the committee's work is commendable, and I beg to move.
Honourable members, I will now propose the question for debate. Be it resolved that the House adopt the report of the Joint Select Committee appointed to consider and report on the Anti-Terrorism Amendment Bill 2018. I recognize the member for Urupuch East.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And if I could begin with the last issue raised by the Attorney General. I do have a reputation to maintain, and the Attorney General is threatening to undermine that by speaking about me so highly. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's a pleasure to rise and contribute on this matter of the report of the Joint Select Committee, which met on 12 occasions to consider an act to amend the Anti-Terrorism Act, Chapter 1207. The Attorney General today, if it is one day I could testify that the Attorney General really would have needed more time, was today. Because it would have taken him about 2 hours to really speak to the bill and the amendments and the depth of this matter. And that would be if he would have abbreviated some of the issues. But it really is an enormous amount of issues to come to, and even in the 45 minutes allotted to me, I will also not be able to speak to all the issues and where we were and where we arrived at. But to begin, in a general sense, this matter, Mr. Deputy Speaker, presents one of the biggest challenges to modern governments in our time. It is really the challenge of our era. And we must be careful that we don't make an error in facing the challenge of our era. Because there can be no doubt about it that in the international community and in the planet we inhabit now, temporarily, that terrorism and all that is associated with terrorism, the hate, the spite, the objective of doing harm to the general public, of undermining states and legitimacy and authority, those issues pose together, collectively, the biggest threat to governments across the world. The government of the United National Congress and the People's Partnership over the years made several advancements in dealing with this matter. And I'm happy with the tone of the Attorney General today, notwithstanding the need for the special majority vote. But there's a tone of understanding, of compromise. And that tone was quite incidentally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, missing in the statement by the Attorney General on the ministerial statement that introduced this bill. But the tone today is one of understanding. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the People's Partnership Administration, as the Attorney General said today, did on several occasions advance the legislative and administrative framework. Today, the Minister from Point Fortin, the Minister of National Security, of all people, spoke earlier and in a question filed, I believe, by Couva North, indicated that it was in August 2015 that the terrorism desk was established at the Ministry of National Security. That has changed its name now, admittedly, but that was in 2015. You see, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the matter before us is a matter involving lives, rights, property, and states. And therefore, the opposition today takes this matter very seriously. Very seriously. And our participation at the Joint Select Committee, I believe all members, but members of the opposition I reflect on now, was one of diligence and commitment and indeed sacrifice. And the member for St. Augustine worked very hard. I was present most of the time. On 2 occasions I missed meetings. It was because we had a conflicting meeting involving the Commissioner of Police matter, which I was also sitting on. But our Senator, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Senator Saddam Hussein, did, I believe, go beyond the call of duty to participate in this matter, both in the committee and outside of this committee, and undertook, even while abroad, to continue studying and working, and indeed made a major submission to the end on our behalf, to which caused some change. I say that because as you go along in these matters, you will find reason for change. You will always make law better and better as you go along. So that sometimes it is not right to be rushing things, to just rush. And with this matter, I must indicate to the Attorney General, who was then the chairman, we were very happy to get the report before it was laid in Parliament. We were very happy. We were very happy before it was laid in Parliament that we had sight of it, and therefore members did not have, mega criticism to make. While there are issues, I will come to, Mr. Deputy Speaker, where we agreed, but there were still issues in which we could not agree. And you cannot agree on everything as you go along. There are still some significant issues, and I'm hoping that the Attorney General and the government will listen to us today as we agree to some issues, but as we continue to raise critical issues which can find its way on board, either in the matter before us now or in a subsequent time, I don't know. But there are still areas which we are concerned about. But for one reason or another, those areas could not carry in the Joint Select Committee. In the interest of completing the work, the members of the opposition, guided by the leader of the opposition, who was informed of the journey, the flight plan, so to speak, we wanted to come back to the House because the Attorney General indicated to us that we have a timeline we are working with, and it's a very serious matter that has implications for this country's economy, security, and because deadlines must be met and so on. We did not want to hold up the committee at the stage of the Joint Select Committee and delay any more. We felt that we can take some of these issues to the House, raise it, and see where we go from there. So our critical appraisal does not mean that we don't support. It does not mean we support necessarily. And the government should understand that. And regardless of how much they may call us unpatriotic and so on, we really don't care about that. We care about doing the people's business and protecting the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm happy the Attorney General understood that well. We are here today on a Wednesday, which is not a normal parliamentary day, to deal with this matter. It's regrettable that the Prime Minister, whose government called the Parliament today, found it fit to be in the next Parliament today. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, in this matter, the Attorney General, if he had more time, would have gone into more of the amendments and so on, and even the submissions made by the critical stakeholders. But in dealing with this matter of fighting terrorism, changing the legal and administrative structure to deal with the challenge, and even looking at the practical side, we had the police come before us, and we examined the police, led by the Acting Commissioner of Police, on their preparedness, on their thinking, on their submission, and so on. And the police, of course, was very diligent in responding to us, and I will touch on some of those issues as we go along. But you see, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in this matter, we must get a delicate balance between several, at times, conflicting principles in governance. We must be responsible while at the same time observing sovereignty. We must be responsible. We must be accountable while at the same time we need to be expedient. Our mindset must be to protect the citizens, but at the same time to maintain their freedom. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, we must be minded of the abuse of executive authority as we go along trying to protect citizens. Those principles come into conflict on these matters, and this is why you need to tread carefully. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, the government, I believe, woke up, and we are happy that they are awake, because from recent dialogue in the national community, they could sleep away anywhere. So we are happy that they are awake to this matter and not sleeping. You see, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when in Thursday, March 2017, there's a report in The Guardian, and there's a report, government has denounced loose figures and claims being made in articles and from the opposition that 400 nationals are involved in terrorist activity. Mr. Speaker, I came to the Parliament and indicated that we had information about persons who were involved with traveling and so on, asked the government to look at it. And they then condemned the opposition on numbers. And today I'm happy that the Attorney General said, it's not whether it's 400 or 135 or 136, it's the issue. Even if it's one, it's serious. So I put that on record, that the opposition was among the first to raise this in this, the 11th Parliament. We're the first. And we come from a particular pedigree. You see, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have in my hand an article, Sunday, 28 September 2014, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It is from the Newsday. Mr. Deputy, I just quote the headline, not disrespecting anyone. Rowley blasts TT support of UN security resolution. And I quote, opposition leader Dr. Keith Rowley yesterday lambasted Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar for Trinidad and Tobago's co-sponsorship of a United Nations Security Council resolution on the fight against terrorism, saying it was best for TT to have passed up on that occasion. TT cannot afford to declare war on terrorists. At this time, you should stay away, Rowley said. You didn't hear properly. TT cannot afford to declare war on terrorists. At this time, we should stay away, Rowley said. The resolution, supported by over 90 countries on Wednesday, this is September 2014, was put to the UN Security Council by United States President Barack Obama in New York. Rowley addressed constituents at some small meeting he had. On the issue of TT supporting the resolution in the fight against terrorism, Rowley said, in any international issue, you should put Trinidad and Tobago interests first. When people behead someone, little Trinidad and Tobago has to be careful. This was the position in opposition. When we took bold action under the member for Siparia, Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar, when we took bold action, when we co-sponsored a UN resolution, today we are asked to support a bill pursuant to our international obligations with the United Nations. So we come full circle, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Because, yeah, that was yesterday. Yesterday was yesterday. Today is today. Mr. Deputy Speaker, a recent travel advisory, travelstate.government, from the U.S. Department of State Bureau of Consular Affairs, exercise increased caution in Trinidad and Tobago due to crime and terrorism, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Some areas have increased risk. And it continues the advice on the United States Department of State side. Do not travel, and they name places, Lavantil, Beetham, Sealots, Cocoreed, and the interior of Queen's Park, Savannah, and Port of Spain due to crime. And they list and they talk about crime and terrorism, and they call other names of places, but they are advising citizens and diplomats as well. U.S. government personnel are prohibited from traveling to certain areas in Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Deputy Speaker, to confront the issue of terrorism, good law is needed, and we are here. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, good law is not enough. You could pass the best laws you want. We can get it right. If there is no faith and no confidence in those in authority at the police, at the government level, if you do not have legitimacy, you cannot make the changes and fight the criminal enterprise in this transnational arena, if you do not have legitimacy.
Solid point.
You cannot operate, you cannot fight terrorism if you cannot attract the trust, the confidence, and the legitimacy required. And I raise that in a context. You see, within recent time, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we had this scare over the carnival period of a terror threat over carnival. Every day we read in the newspapers, plot. And then, and members can correct me if I'm wrong, but I have the series of newspaper clips here in my hand. I will not quote extensively. But it was the politicians who told us about the threat at a press conference at the office of the Prime Minister. The police, through their anti-terrorism unit and so on, ought to be the one telling the population of a threat, not politicians. Politicians may pose their own threat. But the police ought to be informing the population of this. Unless I am not mistaken, I cannot recall the police doing that. So we went through a national trauma the community, the Islamic community in particular, and we must say it is the Islamic community, it was no other community, went through trauma. Went through a period of great concern, emotional vulnerability. They did not know if at the home of their neighbor a door will be broken down at 4 o'clock in the morning. Men, women, and children dragged out, and so on. Or in a mosque. And we had this misdirected, construed, ill-advised approach of the political directorate, when the police and the law enforcement agency should really take the lead and give information that they are sure about, not the politicians. And lo and behold, we kept asking in the parliament, what is the threat? What is the threat? Again, check the records if you may. The first time a carnival threat, the issue of a threat over carnival was made, was at a meeting, a press conference of the government, and subsequently in a parliament by a politician. You will correct me if I am wrong. I am sure speakers will correct me. But the position we put to the government is that in this matter, allow the police and law enforcement to lead by communicating with the national community on these matters. Not the executive. Not the executive. Work on policy and law. And now we have a complete unsettling reality of persons coming back to Trinidad and saying, no, this is a hoax. They were forced to do this or compelled to do this, and they had to say this to be released or to end their period of torture.
They read a script.
And they read a script and so on. So it is national confusion. It is trauma that is unnecessary, completely unnecessary. So the point I make only is that if there is no trust and legitimacy, you cannot implement not even good law. It will not make sense. And not that this law is bad necessarily, although we can look at areas for consideration. You see, Mr. Deputy Speaker, an issue arose as well in our examinations and so on, because I raised the question, the verbatim report is here, I don't want to again quote the whole report. When the police came before us, I raised in the public domain the issue of their unit, their anti-terrorism unit. Is it established? What is it doing? How much people there? Because I was concerned that in the examination, the hierarchy of the police came, but unless I'm mistaken, I did not see an individual from that anti-terrorism unit. Because you would think that that unit would send somebody or the head to deal with these matters. But yes, but none from the anti-terrorism unit. Again. But having said that, we can argue that. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, I raise this matter because a concern to me then, and a concern to me now, amplified now more than ever, was the issue of sensitivity. It is no secret that your challenges you meet with on terrorism, dealing with terrorism and so on, as the Attorney General admitted himself in probably a more flamboyant way than me, than that it involves names, it involves particular culture, religion, and so on. And therefore, there must be sensitivity. And today, I call upon the police service to immediately implement a policy and program of religious, ethnic, and cultural sensitivity, particularly when dealing with these matters. You see, it is more than just a woman police officer going on TV and wishing people happy Diwali the day before Eid. It is more than that. That by itself is almost that is a clip for Comedy Central. But it is something much deeper. It is something much deeper than that. There has been a historical lack of sensitivity in the police service to religion and culture. And those things will affect trust. In New York, in London, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I had the privilege of being in New York and meeting with a team of people, of course, Commissioner of Police and so on. They actually recruit persons from specific communities because they believe that that is the best way to get intelligence. And we had the Prime Minister making a statement, talking somewhere, and saying, I am vindicated because they found the guns in a mosque somewhere. They didn't find nothing. It was the patriotic brothers and sisters of the Islamic community who risked their lives to call the police. The police found nothing. They found nothing. It was brave members of the Islamic community
In Monroe Road.
in Monroe Road who risked their lives to call the police for this discovery. The Prime Minister said, I'm vindicated. Vindicated for what? For what? And will not apologize, because you see, this is a government that is really sorry for nothing and no one. They're sorry for nobody. You know? The member from Moruga bumping his gum with some inane comment. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me focus here. The other point I want to make, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that in the well, please. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, the bill attempts to deal, as the Attorney General rightly said, with the issue of observed deficiencies. And that has been something ongoing. We have been subject to a lot of analysis and a lot of studies and inquiries, investigations, and assessment, and so on, and there are observed deficiencies in law, in administration, and in operation. The bill itself and the amendments speaks to our compliance with our international obligations, the UN, the CFATF, etc. And the Attorney General already spoke about the obligation 5, 6, and I believe 10, and the UN resolutions. He called the numbers and he put it in a context there. There's no need to do that. I just want to make one correction and just to clarify. Earlier, when the Attorney General spoke, he may have mistakenly indicated that the notice requirement to submit to the Commissioner of Police, which I'll come to later, the notice requirement, there's something of a license or exemption or something. But I don't think that is in the notice. You just submit to the Commissioner of Police before you travel, if you are traveling to a designated area. There's no license or exemption issue there. But it may have mistakenly come out, so that we clarify that early o'clock, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will come to all the, well, I'll come to the goodies in the bill, which there's a fundamental difference here between the first draft, and I took the opportunity to actually bring something called a first draft. It was actually the first draft of the bill given to the JSC in January. January 26, we were appointed. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, if one would read this, and then one would come to what is called the consolidation of the Anti-Terrorism Act, chapter this, and I have my own here, 18th May 2018. If you would read the two, you would see the leap that we took by dealing with issues of oppression, dealing with issues of perception, dealing with issues where you can threaten persons. And again, the Attorney General did that. He did some of that to indicate that we made several changes. Whereas before, in the first draft, you had a situation where an entire company, an entire entity could be branded terrorists and taken before the courts and dealt with accordingly. Where one person alone may have been on a frolic of his own, we have changed that so that the person is culpable, not the entity. And not other directors and managers and so on in the entity. That was actually in the first draft, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We also had in the first draft the issue of the use of Islamic names and so on. That, I think, came out early. The brothers and sisters who came from the Islamic community raised several issues, which I have here and want to get back to. And we also discussed even the very meaning of terrorism. Because in dealing with this, one has to build what is called a consensus definition. Because we may not find one definition that will suit us all. So we build the consensus definition. But one issue, Mr. Deputy Speaker, which I can just touch on and I'll come back to later, has to do, which we raised in our meetings, but I wanted to amplify here, the role of the government and the role specifically of the Attorney General. And I do not for any purpose mean this current Attorney General, who on several occasions have admitted that he is temporary, in that someone else will take over from him at some time. I mean, that is how it works. It could be anybody. It could be Port of Spain North. It could be Laventil West. It could be neither of them. Well, we still have a God to look to. Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I think it may be a good time for us to suspend the sitting for tea at this time. On the resumption, right, you will be allocated your to complete your first discourse and your additional 15 minutes.
Sure, thank you.
Right now, you would have an additional 7 minutes. 7 minutes in order to complete, plus an additional 15 minutes. Right, so at this time we will suspend and we will resume at 5 p.m.